Lopez wants it away. And it's hit deep to left center. Andrew Jones on the run. This one has a chance. Home run! Mike Piazza and the Mets lead 3-2. Bartolo has done it! The impossible has happened! This is one of the great moments in the history of baseball.
Ladies and gentlemen, Mets fans of all ages, here is your host, Nick Durst. Hello, Mets fans. Welcome back to another episode of Bleav in the Mets right here in the Bleav Podcasting Network. I'm your host, Nick Durst, and we are in the midst of it now. We're looking right now at the World Series going to get underway very shortly here. And for the Mets and the Mets fans, we are counting down the days till the World Series is over so that we can focus on the Mets off season and see what is actually going to be happening here with this franchise. Will they go for it? Will they spend in the off season? Will they kind of run it back with the similar roster, let the young guys grow? So we'll get into the roster construction in a few minutes here. Of course, we'll talk about who's going to be the Mets manager coming up on October 31st, Halloween, which will be the last day that Craig Counsell is under contract with the Brewers. I'm sure he'll be having a November 1st meeting with David Stearns. But joining me now to break it all down, you, of course, see him on SNY, longtime New York sports columnist, baseball expert, Anthony McCarron. Anthony, welcome in. If I would have told you in March, we would have been seeing Max Scherzer and Justin Verlander pitching in the championship series. What would you have said?
That's crazy talk, Nick. I can't believe that it's come to this. I can't believe the way that the baseball season ended up for the Mets. It was such a year of optimism and hope, and it just cratered, and it's terrible.
Absolutely awful. But now you look around these playoffs every year. You're looking around and you're seeing former Mets all over the place. Obviously, Scherzer and Verlander, they weren't homegrown or anything, but it's just a pattern here that keeps developing with the Mets getting rid of players too soon, perhaps. We could date back to, in a different degree, trading Scott Kazmir, but then moving on, you got Justin Turner, you let him go, he became a superstar, and the list goes on. Travis d'Arnaud, remember Brody Van Wagenen cut him after six at-bats, DFA'd. He goes on, unbelievable run with the Rays. Now he's one of the great Braves catchers of all time, one of the all-time leaders of home runs for catchers in the playoffs. And then you have guys like Paul Sewald, who has been great with the Diamondbacks in this postseason run and was great with the Mariners. Chris Flexen, to a degree, they let him go, and he ended up having that one good season with the Mariners. They bring him back, of course, with the Trevor Gott trade, but then they let him go. And the list goes on and on. Seth Lugo, he had a really strong year as a starter for the Padres. I don't know why the Mets didn't see that coming. Your colleague on Baseball Night in New York, Terry Collins, tells the audience all the time, when Lugo came up for us in 2016 as a starter, he was great. And the Mets, for some reason, just only saw him as a reliever. I think
TC loves Lugo, doesn't he?
He loves Lugo. And what's not to love? The Mets could have certainly used his 3.5 ERA this season in the rotation with some stability there. Why do you think this just keeps happening over and over again with this franchise over the past 15 years?
Well, in fairness, Nick, I think we have to make the point that every team has misses. The Mets have a few, and you listed them all there. And it's not a great look, obviously. But this happens all the time. When you look at Paul Sewald, and I'm not defending the Mets here, as we'll get to in a minute, but Paul Sewald was kind of like getting toward his 30s, hadn't pitched particularly well for the Mets. And then, to his credit and to the Mariners development people, and this goes for other players too, they turned themselves into something. I mean, Justin Turner, I can't really call him a miss by the Mets because he was kind of like a random extra guy for them. I think Terry Collins was one of the few guys who really loved him as a player when he was on the Mets. And I know he had that string of game-winning hits for them and everything, but he had no power back then. And he wasn't a particularly great major league hitter either, but he made himself into one. And, if you remember, before he got to the Dodgers, he went into the hitting lab and reworked his swing on his own, and he became something. And now, of course, he's one of the great postseason guys of all time as well. He's had a wonderful career, but I give him a lion's share of the credit for that. I completely agree with you. Travis d'Arnaud was a big mistake. It was almost like, I don't know why they treated him that way. 2 years earlier, he had an 825 OPS in a season that the Mets made the playoffs, made the World Series. And if you remember, he hit that postseason home run into the apple. He had some flair too, and he was the centerpiece of that big trade with the Blue Jays, that became known later as the Noah Syndergaard trade. It was the Travis d'Arnaud trade at the beginning. So he was always a talented prospect, and good for him for seizing opportunities elsewhere. But yeah, that was a huge miss. And another one, and look, I understand there was risk with signing Zack Wheeler when he became a free agent because of his injury history. He had missed 2 full years. He'd had some other nicks here and there. And you remember Brody Van Wagenen, I think it was, who said that that Wheeler parlayed 2 good half seasons into a big contract. And I think you could see Zack Wheeler coming a little bit. The health was a worry. Some guys, we think about all these touted prospects, and you look back at Wheeler. Well, he was the number 6 pick in the draft, and they traded him. They traded Carlos Beltran to get him. He should be a star immediately, and he pitched well for the Mets early on. Then he got hurt, and then he was on his way back. And there was evidence that he was, on his way up as well. And the Mets didn't see it that way. And 5 years for $118 million is a lot of money. They weren't going to go there. That was clear. And the Phillies took a chance, because it seems the Phillies' theory is to say, hey, there's a good player, let's go sign him. And it has certainly worked for them, as we have seen in the past 2 Octobers. But yeah, to me, Zack Wheeler was a huge miss as well. But who knows if he would have wanted to stay either, Nick, to be quite honest.
Well, you heard all those rumblings in 2015 when he was out. He asked for World Series tickets, or he wanted to sit in the dugout, and he was told no. And then he said, I'll buy World Series tickets. They said no. So there was maybe some bad blood there. Ultimately, maybe it comes down to the ownership, and they didn't want to pay the Wilpons. Maybe it would be different if Cohen was here, because now you look back on it, that's pretty much a bargain for a starting pitcher. I mean, look what Carlos Rondon's got. Garrett Cole, all these star pitchers are getting so much money. Scherzer and Verlander getting over $40 million a year. So who knows? Right now, it looks like one of the greatest contracts ever signed for a starter, and only 1 year left on that deal, 2024. So Wheeler is going to get another payday. So he's going to parlay those 2 half-great seasons into 5 great seasons, and then he's going to get another big-time deal, I would think. And who knows? Maybe at that point, there would be a lot of suitors for him, where last free agency, there was only just the Phillies, really, because the Mets didn't want to pay.
And he's authored a great postseason resume, too, since then as well. I mean, he's one of the reasons the Phillies are the threat that they are in October lately. And, that's all to the good for him. He's a super talented guy who I always felt like was working his butt off. And it just, I said this before, but it just takes time for some guys to get through whatever it is, whether it's injuries or development. And, it's not like development is not a straight line. You don't get to the end game of your career where you sort of are a good player, a great pitcher, whatever, by just marching there and having it happen, which is something that the Mets will have to discover with some of their prospects that they're sort of sifting through now, Nick, in terms of guys we've seen in the past year, guys who are coming up. We hear about these names and we're excited to see them on the list, and this guy's ranked this and this guy's ranked that. And so we think that translates into immediate stardom and immediate impact. And there are bumps along the way, and every person is a different person. And sometimes the prospect lists are wrong, and sometimes the front offices are wrong, and these guys don't pan out, whoever's fault it is, but it happens. And, so patience is key in all these things. And, some guys, come up and they just explode. Mm-hmm. And, those are the truly incredible players of our time.
Absolutely. And we're going to talk about some prospects momentarily here. Just wanted to ask you, when it's all said and done, we'll fast forward here 4 or 5 years. When you look back on it, who had the better career, Zack Wheeler or Jacob DeGrom?
Well, That's a tough one to say because of DeGrom's health issues that have plagued him over the past few years. He has had truly some of the great pitching seasons in our lifetimes. So it's hard for me to imagine it not being him, as long as he gets back to some reasonable amount of Jacob DeGrom going forward here for the Texas Rangers. That's not to ding Zack Wheeler, who I think I've made clear I'm a big fan of in terms of pitcher. But DeGrom, we'll see if he can. I don't know if does he need to make the adjustment that like the slider at 94 is great, when you're throwing 101 or whatever, but can he physically stand up to that over the long haul? I don't know. And he's got to get out there, and he's got to pitch, and he's got to add seasons to the back of his baseball card to be considered. But if Zack Wheeler keeps going along like this and DeGrom sort of fades into health obscurity, then Wheeler will take that title. But talent wise, impact wise, and so far ceiling wise, I think it's DeGrom.
And the Rangers in the World Series without Jacob DeGrom. So
how good are they going to be next year?
Well, we'll see if DeGrom pitches next year.
Right.
Who knows? But crazy to think about that crazy Mets rotation, which made one run through with Harvey, Wheeler, DeGrom, Syndergaard, Matz, and it didn't ultimately work out. Got to the World Series, but it didn't work out. And We talked about some prospects and some times it not working out. So I want to name some players here, and we'll use the Mets crystal ball here. Maybe we should just ask Terry Collins, because he seems to always know exactly who's going to work out.
He's a smart baseball man. Yeah.
Yeah. So we're going to do a keep or delete segment here. So you tell me, should the Mets keep him because there's going to be potential, or he might be great somewhere else, or are we going to cut ties with them, DFA them, trade them because it's time to move on? So we'll start in the bullpen, which has been a disaster overall. But this guy, no fault of his own, really, but he's kind of become the face of the failure of the bullpen. And he's had so much potential. They acquired him in a trade a few years ago, and he got injured, and then he was good. And then last year, he was just hanging the breaking ball, and that's Drew Smith. Do you think the Mets should bring him back? I think they should, but they should not consider him as such a more of a high leverage guy like they have been the last few years. What do you think about Drew Smith?
I think you're onto something there, because I think that in today's Major League Baseball, the bullpen is such a valuable sort of evolving piece during every single season that you can't just toss away talented guys like Drew Smith because they've annoyed your fan base by being inconsistent and walking too many guys, particularly in 2023. I don't believe he's a high leverage reliever on a good team. I think if he's a high leverage reliever on your team, you're not a good team, or that's another check mark to where you're not a good team. Now, that's as he stands right now, because as you say, he had a lot of potential. He did pitch well earlier in his career. I think the Mets should keep him and see if he can pitch his way into, through the sort of war of attrition that every relief corps is during the season. Guys will get hurt, guys will underperform, there'll be moves made, blah, blah, blah. But can Drew Smith, in a limited role where he's not protecting that slim one-run lead in the seventh inning, can he pitch himself into a better spot with some more consistency? The walks were really concerning this year. I think it was 4.6 per 9 innings. That's unacceptable for a relief pitcher who's already coming in to situations that are troublesome. And if you add more trouble, at some point, somebody's going to hit a bloop, and then you're going to say, well, weak contact. Well, you walked 2 guys before that, too. So, that's where I think I'm at with Drew Smith. Valuable arm to a point, but he's got to do more, and he's got to earn, and not just through injury and attrition. He's got to earn bigger situations.
Absolutely. And the bullpen really needs to be retooled. I thought going into last year, even with Edwin Diaz, the bullpen was going to be a weakness. So I'd love to see them bring David Robertson back. Maybe there's some sour grapes there, but we know he loves playing in New York. Get him in that 8th inning role. But you can't be going into the season again with these optionable arms, which we heard Billy Epler preach about last offseason. We can't be relying on Tommy Hunter. We can't be seeing the Sean Reed Foleys of the world, the Daniil Reyeses. Got to get some legit arms in there. And with the bullpen, Drew Smith, I think he had a 171 batting average against with the fastball. So something is there. There's some magic. This keeper cut here, not a player, but he survived once before. Is Jeremy Hefner going to be back? Is he going to go through his third manager now with the Mets?
It's a great question, and I think it's an unknowable answer right now. By the way, I think I pulled a neck muscle, nodding as vigorously as possible with your assessment that they needed more in the bullpen even before Diaz got hurt last year, because I thought that a lot of people glossed over some open spots in that pen for me, even before Edwin Diaz, who was obviously one of the great relievers in the game today, was hurt. They needed more. And I think that they sort of not a Cadillac is the wrong term for it, but they kind of nonchalanted, we got enough in the bullpen. No, there are no more enough in the bullpens in today's game. You got to get guys. Robertson, I love him. Love to have him back. It would be great for the Mets, I think, to have him in there. And they need, I think they could add another Robertson-esque arm as well and then welcome Diaz back and hopefully back to his old lofty heights. To get back to the Hefner question, it really is unknowable now what they would do because he's in a weird position because you can't hire a president of baseball operations and say, David Stearns, it's your show, but the pitching coach goes nowhere. David Stearns is going to be like, no, if I take this job, I'm doing what I want. And that sort of extends through to the manager and going from there. Like if the manager he hires has his own guy that he's worked with and he can talk David Stearns into hiring him, then, there may be a new pitching coach. And so I think that that's way up in the air and way too early to keep or delete.
Yeah, I would say if it ends up being Craig Counsell as the manager, I would assume he would at least attempt to just bring his host staff over from Milwaukee, and we'll see. So we'll keep an eye on that once the manager, and we'll revisit that. Back to the players here. Mark Vientos. I think this guy has shown some flashes. I think they really messed him up because he kept getting called up and he was sitting on the bench and he was getting 2 at-bats per week. But I think the Mets are at a stage where they really should be win now, win later. And I don't think you could ride it out with him and give him those 150 at-bats to start the year and see, because you have too many of those guys that we're going to talk about shortly. So I think with me, Vientos, I would cut ties with him. Now, that doesn't necessarily mean I'm DFAing him or trading him. He's got options, so you can leave him in the minors. But I don't think this is a guy that, if you want to compete next year, is someone you're going to be able to have the patience or time to have him as a starter. He doesn't have a position, as we know. The Mets have a bunch of third baseman prospects now. They have Alonso. He's not the answer at DH, at least in my opinion. I think they need to go for bigger and better at the DH spot. I think they will attempt to get somebody like Ohtani. If not, get a star. Get somebody like Cody Bellinger, rotate it around with the DH position. You got to get better at DH. Your thoughts on Mark Vientos?
Yeah, I mean, I want to cite one number here that or a couple numbers here that I wrote down that maybe this can convince you that he's worth more than a sort of hold in the minors type thing. Okay. Average exit velocity for Mark Vientos. I don't know where you land on exit velocity. I'm intrigued by exit velocity because, generally speaking, baseball players try to hit the ball hard because it usually comes up to good results. And we've got some evidence of that with some of the analytics that are out there now. So his average exit velocity was 92.5 last season, which is really good. In fact, it's better than, I'll read you 4 players: Mookie Betts, Kyle Schwarber, Austin Riley, and Adolis Garcia. Now, slightly better than those guys. And I know it's a small sample size, and I know I'm sort of cookie cuttering a stat to fit a narrative here, and that's fine. But it does show, to me, that shows some potential for Vientos. Now, I totally agree with you that he was not handled correctly last year. Once the Mets had determined that they were punting last season, he should have played every single day, righty, lefty, regardless. And there were too many at-bats being sucked up by other guys who should not have been, were not in the evaluation period of, who can actually play going forward, and he should have gotten those spots. Now, you're right. He can't play a position, at least not now, and he needs to figure out a way to be acceptable on defense somewhere. He doesn't currently rate that. And you're right. The Mets have a lot of guys there. Now, I'm not saying that he's a hill I'm dying on, so to speak, but I would say there's some potential value there. There is raw power. That is something that the Major League team lacks right now. And I think that he's somebody who's interesting. That's about as far as I'll go. But I will say this: if the Mets don't Bleav, if the development people don't Bleav, and if David Stearns doesn't Bleav, then they should try to trade him and get one of the relief arms we talked about in for him, and just cut the cord with him and move on. But I do wonder if he's a guy who could sort of get you an easy 25 home runs as a part-time player, bench guy. Maybe figure's a little too high, but I think there could be some slug there. And he might be one of those guys who, look, we all talked him up. I know I did. We all talked him up. Got to get him up here. Got to get him up here. What's he doing in the minors? They need some power. And then he didn't hit immediately. And so we're like, oh, okay. So maybe he's one of those guys who needs a little time.
So I hear what you're saying with this exit velo, and I would be selling that to other general managers because the Mets at the deadline last year, they acquired 4 shortstops. Last time I checked, they have a shortstop. They also have Ryan Mauricio. They have McNeil locked up. They have Nimmo locked up. So all these shortstops, there's only so many spots to move them. And there's so many position players. The Mets have really not much starting pitching depth as far as high-end prospects.
That's for sure.
I think Stearns is going to be making a trade this offseason at some point to try to get one of these starters, whether it's a Corbin Burns, it's going to be Shane Bieber's going to be on the move most likely. Glasnow's probably going to get moved. So I think Vientos is a nice piece to put in a package, and you give him one of those top prospects, whether it's a Jet Williams or Acuna, whatever it may be. Not saying let's just trade these guys, but if you can get a Cy Young Award winner in here, I think that's probably the move, and that's probably going to make the most sense for the Mets here when they're saying they're not going to go all for it for spending wise in the offseason. So I think Vientos is somebody that if there are teams that Bleav in him with his exit velocity and his power, he has power. We know we've seen it. He just needs the time to bat.
Right.
I think he might be a prime trade piece this offseason. Do you think Stearns is going to attempt to make a trade? And because the rotation has 2 guys right now, really, that you could count on in Quintana and Senga.
It's funny because the whole talk about what Max Scherzer said, which I Bleav is the truth. There's no reason in the world that Max Scherzer would make up the idea that that's what he was told by the Mets, that they were going to kind of take a step back in 24. But the Mets kind of Steve Cohen particularly sort of bit back at that narrative because I don't think they liked the public take on, the Mets are giving up on 24 too. That's outrageous. And that would be outrageous, to be quite frank, because they have some players in their prime who, with the right pieces added, could make a run. I mean, the Diamondbacks, are, made the NLCS, 84 win Diamondbacks. There are opportunities in these playoffs. We all go deep into it's a crapshoot now. Even the superpowers can't win. It's like, okay, so be one of the ones that
maybe the Mets
exactly
might have too early. They were only
I totally
games back in the Diamondbacks.
Oh, Nick, don't get me started.
I want to get you started, Anthony. I want to get you started because they put with the talent. We saw Lindor came around. Scherzer, he pitched okay. Verlander pitched great. That could have been a difference right there.
I agree. I think that they punted on a season that they had a chance to potentially do some damage. And that's not the right way to go. And I know they got all these glorious prospects and what genius moves they pulled off. The Rangers are going to the World. Max Scherzer isn't going to be pitching in the World Series, by the way. And I'm not saying the Mets would have made it. I'm not saying the Mets would have gotten to the World Series if they had made the playoffs. None of that. But it was they had a team full of good players who were playing poorly at the time. And I agree they gave no reason for anyone to have any faith in them other than the sort of long season. These guys are too good to be this bad. And I think they could have made a run and done something or been in some sort of contention. And it's too bad they didn't, because I feel like people forget that the years that you have a chance you don't have a chance every single season. I know that, that's the big buzz around the Mets, sustainable success. Well, I mean, even the Dodgers, the model that the Mets aspire to, have won the World Series once since 1998, if I have that correctly in my brain. And it was in the shortened season. So their detractors are all saying, well, who knows if they would have won if it were the full season. But all I'm saying is that the years that you're in place, you should try. And, it's great to build up the farm system, but that also takes years. And fans are eager to believe that every single prospect is going to be great. Oh, we got the next Mike Trout here, and Acuna's brother is, Acuna said his brother's more talented than he was, or had better success at this age, so he's going to be better than Ronald Acuna. No, he won't be. He won't be. It would be the highest of high miracles if Luis Angel Acuna is better than his brother.
A Jeremy Giambi situation.
Yeah, it was funny. I was talking to a scout about this, and I said, well, you got to love the guy's bloodlines at least, right? And he says, well, talk to me about the Canseco twins sometimes. So
Right.
I'm like, yeah, I hear you. But yeah, so look, you're right. They do have a lot of guys blocking Vientos, and but yeah, they're not all going to pan out. We're all in love with Jet Williams now. We all love Acuna. We don't know what they are.
Right.
All they are right now is good prospects, and credit to them to building themselves up and striving to get to the spot that they're in. There's a long way to go to being a really good major league player. And sometimes fans forget that guys aren't the number on the prospect list. They are guys who need to still develop and be something.
Right. Case in point would be Brett Batty last season. Such high hopes for
Nice
him.
segue.
Now, remember, we got sold the Eduardo Escobar. Unbelievable September. He's going to start the year. That lasted about a week, 2 weeks. And then Brett Batty came up. We thought he was going to just take over and hit. The big leagues are hard. He was unable to hit. Ends up going back to the minors later on. If the Mets are going to be like Eppler told Scherzer, we're not really necessarily going to go for it in 2024, then sure, absolutely. Brett Batty, put him in. You could put him at third base. I think he's going to be with this team next year. I just don't know how long the leash is going to be, because I'm going to couple him here with Ronnie Mauricio. I don't see how both of these guys are going to be able to start every day, because McNeil's going to start for sure.
Right.
Maybe McNeil moves to the outfield, but it's kind of a puzzle piece here with McNeil, Batty, and Mauricio. I think Mauricio showed enough that at the very least in his limited time at bats, he should be starting next year to start the season. Mauricio probably should have been up in May, perhaps, to kind of save the season. Maybe they weren't right. They didn't know what he was going to be, but look at the alternatives. They had nothing to lose. So Brett Batty, Anthony, we both agree he's going to be on this roster, I believe. Do you think he's going to have a long leash, though, at third base?
That's a great question. Well, I think we're really going to see what Brett Batty is made of this year, because he endured a lot of failure. And big time prospects, first round picks, in their lifetimes, they don't get that until they get to professional baseball. And so you see what he was when he was called up, you're right. Escobar was obviously not going to work, and they needed something. He was going to be a boost, and he's a very talented guy, hits a lot of line drives, seems to have an idea at the plate, although he strikes out a little too much, but who doesn't nowadays? That's something that he can grow out of a little bit anyway, to still be a constructive major league hitter, I think. His defense is not great. And sometimes I wonder if the idea that, that narrative weighed on him, because everybody was so focused on, well, I don't know if he can play third base at the major league level. Maybe he can't. We don't know the answer to that even now. But there was a lot going on for him last year. And, how does he come out of the struggle? How will he have persevered through all this? And, he's definitely his prospect reputation is tarnished now a little bit, because he did have so much failure at the big league level. That doesn't mean that he's not redeemable. That doesn't mean that he can't be what they hoped he was going to be when he was picked. I think, 12th overall or something. So yeah, I think he's going to be on the team. I think you got to give him 150 or 200 at bats, don't you, to see? Mm-hmm. I mean, unless he's just completely inept, and I don't think he's going to be completely inept. So Yeah, I think he's probably got a long list of things to work on this winter, and he could really show the Mets something by coming out strong and playing well. And look, if other this is sort of your Vientos take a little bit, but if other teams think highly of him, and you can get Corbin Burnes in a deal that includes Brett Baty, then you trade Brett Baty in the Corbin Burnes deal, and you stop. This is one of my look. I realize that this is my thing, but like all the people who are out there hugging all the prospects all the time, can't trade any of these precious unknowns. That's ridiculous. You have to give up to get, and a lot of these guys don't pan out anyway. So I feel like he's a guy that if someone wants him and you need to make a move for a pitcher, do it.
I agree. Definitely agree. And then you have all those prospects at shortstop. You can move one of them to third base, move Mauricio third. I'm curious to see if Baty's going to maybe play some left field in spring training. We heard some rumors
Probably
last
a good
year.
idea.
I think Mauricio showed he's probably a better third baseman than Baty. So, and again, there's going to be an opening either in left field or second base if you get those three guys with McNeil. So we'll see how that pans out, because I don't anticipate the Mets signing an outfielder. And the outfielder that I think they're going to come back, and they should come back, but I don't want to see him start. I want to see DJ Stewart come back.
Yeah.
He showed enough, I think, and struggled in September, but I think DJ Stewart is somebody who they should bring back in some capacity. I'm going to couple him with a few guys here, Anthony, and you let me know who you think of these guys will be on the roster next year. DJ Stewart, Omar Narvaez, who probably isn't the happiest guy in the world because he came to be a starter. But I mean, we're going to bring Nito back up as the Mets fan. I think keep Narvaez unless somebody's giving you like a high-end reliever or something, but I don't think that value is going to be there. Starling Marte, who I think the Mets would like to trade, but he's going to have no value coming off an injured season. Maybe the Mets eat some money and then you can move him. And of course, Daniel Vogelbach, who the Mets have another option on. His numbers ended up being okay at the end of the year, but that doesn't tell the story all the time. Look at Escobar the year before. So DJ Stewart, Narvaez, Vogelbach, and Marte, Anthony.
So I think Stewart will be on the team. He's at least a representative left-handed bench bat, occasional starter. Call him off the bench late in the game to hit one over the fence. I think he did a great job, and that's a kudos to him for seizing an opportunity for a guy who, I know he was a former first-round pick of another team, and obviously had some talent and some regard in the industry, but he had an opportunity and he seized it, and that's the name of the game in the majors. So good for him. Narvaez, I don't see any reason why he shouldn't be Francisco Alvarez's backup next year. I understand he probably wouldn't love that idea, and I get it, but he's capable. He can do the job, and I think he having him around to sort of help Alvarez is not such a bad thing either. Because I think Alvarez is an untouchable marvel who they really need to explore all he can be. And if he has an older catcher tutoring him, on the defense and all that stuff, which Alvarez performed well at this year, but further development there can't hurt a thing. Who was the other guy?
Vogelbach and Marte.
Vogelbach needs to go. I'm not an anti-Daniel Vogelbach guy. I just think that he clogs a roster spot because all he can do is what he was doing last year. And he didn't really, I wrote down his numbers, slash line 233, 339, 409, OPS 742, which is slightly above average in Major League Baseball. If you're going to have a left-handed DH on your team who can't play the field, that can't be the number. That his OPS can't be 104. It's got to be much, much better than that, OPS plus. And he doesn't do that for you. So I think they need to embrace the versatility of a bench spot even more and move on from him. I think if you want to have a DH platoon, then I think DJ Stewart needs to get a lot of lefty at bats as your lefty DH. So Vogelbach, I'm moving on from. Last guy was Marte.
Yep. Yeah,
fascinating case here. Let me go to my notes again. He's due $41.5 million over the last 2 years of his contract. In fairness to him, he was not healthy all year. That was clear. 86 games. He had his career worst OPS, 625. I know he stole a few bases, but it was easier to steal bases this past season because of the rule changes. But he did not look comfortable all season. I don't know what you trade him for. And I know Steve Cohen is an exceptionally rich owner. I don't love the idea of them trading him and eating all the salary because they can. There's something that sort of seems, I don't know, icky about that to me. I get the strategy of what they did over this past deadline, basically buying prospects when they were trading Scherzer and Verlander. I understand it. When you start swallowing every dime, who's going to take Starling Marte anyway, unless they are really sort of in on his resurgence. So maybe the Mets' best value play here with him is to see if him being healthy gets him back to being close to the player he was in his first year, which was pretty good as a Met. Of course, the flip side too is he just turned 35 years old.
Yeah, I think that the only thing you could do is hold on to him because he's not going to have much value on the market right now. And maybe if he does well early on, he'll have some value. And I think that's the play. And I think you're a better team with him. I think at the very least with the way the roster is currently constructed, get him in there. Hopefully he's healthy, has a nice resurgence, and lengthens the lineup for sure. And he definitely is a good defender. That's something that the Mets kind of missed a lot without him in the outfield last year. And the last thing we're going to touch on here is, of course, the manager. And we know Craig Counsell is the main target. I want to talk about some alternatives in case Craig Counsell decides he wants to stay in Milwaukee, he wants to take a year off. We hear the reports came out that Stearns is going to be open to hiring a first-time manager. Now, I think that's maybe a little risky with the Mets if they are going to try to compete next year. Look at Bruce Bochy, who was in the World Series, Dusty Baker, who won the World Series last year. I think the veteran manager, I would like a veteran manager. I think that's still the way to go. And regardless of who they hire outside of Counsell, they're not going to be as experienced or as savvy as Buck Showalter.
Right.
So we're looking at the first-time managers here. There's so many names out there. You hear some guys with Mets ties, like a Joe McEwing, and then you hear all these other guys, bench coaches all over the place. I think if I'm going to go with a first-time manager, I don't think it's going to happen, but he'd technically be a second-time manager. I go with Carlos Beltran. Give him a shot. If you're going to go with this young core and you're not going to have the pressure of we need to win this year, I think he's someone that the players would respect. He's an all-time great Met. What do you think about Beltran, and what other options do you think the Mets could potentially explore there, at least to interview-wise?
Well, as far as Carlos goes, I applauded when they hired him. I thought he was a good choice. I thought he was a very intriguing managerial candidate. I think that I doubt that he's going to be a candidate. I mean, I could be wrong, but I doubt he's a candidate for this job because if you're David Stearns, do you want to make your first hire one that fairly or unfairly, Beltran's got some baggage with him? I mean, he's probably the single person who was most adversely affected from the punishment of the Astros cheating scandal. That whether that's fair or not, depends on your viewpoint of that whole thing. But do you want to bring that on now? Do you want to, the same organization, fired him after hiring him after that came out? They didn't really have any other choice. I don't think they had
Red
to
Sox,
do it.
They brought back their manager though. So
yes, but there's a difference though. But
World Series already. Right?
Alex Cora was already obviously a gifted manager, and that was like they knew they had something great there. We don't know much about the possibility of Beltran being a great manager. I think he would eventually be a good manager. Yeah. But he brings that risk of a first timer. And we'll see. But I just don't think that. I think if there were more sort of like if we didn't have a new front office administration, maybe he would have more of a chance. Right. But I just think that, first of all, I think Craig Counsell is probably going to end up being the manager. But I think that if he's not, I don't think they're going to go Carlos.
So the only other veteran guy out there that I think would make sense, but I think he's maybe going to be blackballed for a while from consideration for any job. That's Joe Maddon. It seems like a match as far as the analytics, working with the front office and everything. Again, Joe Maddon started the shift, but I don't think he's going to get a shot really anytime soon to manage. And why do you think that is? Because of the way everything kind of flamed out in Chicago and then didn't really work out in Los Angeles?
I mean, I think that's got to be a big part of it. I think he had some quote about being interested in the Mets or something.
Who wouldn't be interested?
Right, exactly. I mean, everyone should be. There aren't that many of these jobs around. It's not like you're a mid-level vice president of a corporation somewhere where there are a few of those around, but these jobs are finite. Big league manager. So I don't know. I mean, he should always be toasted in Chicago as the manager who brought the team to the curse-ending World Series victory. I don't know why it didn't work out in Anaheim with the Angels. Not a whole lot seems to work out in Anaheim for the Angels, even though they have two of the greatest players who ever walked the face of the earth, or had. Ohtani's a free agent. We'll see if he goes back. But they've never been able to put anything together there in recent years. And he didn't help it along the way. So, I don't know. I mean, I feel like a lot of times we look at the managers who are the old timey ones, the familiar faces, and they're comfortable because they're familiar, and it works sometimes. The ALCS was a great example, Dusty and Bochy, as you mentioned. The NLCS is a mix of two guys who are in their first job still. Yeah. And so that works too sometimes. I mean, in fact, I think the number is, depending on how you view Alex Cora's tenure as one tenure with the Red Sox or two separate ones. 22 of the guys who managed in out of the 30 who managed this season were in their first job. That doesn't mean that they were in their first year or anything like that, but that they had grown into the Torey Lovulos or the Rocco Baldellis of their time. So there is success to be had with a first-time manager. I understand where Met fans look at the first-time manager and go like, "No, Mickey Callaway, no!"
Right.
I get
Start
it.
from Callaway and Rojas.
Yes, exactly. So I understand where the comfort.
I think the key for a first-time manager is to get a good bench coach, because I think that's kind of been the issue with these first-time managers sometimes. But the thing with the first-time manager is they can succeed, but you need to give them time to succeed. Like it's like Lovello, like you see, he's been there for a while. It's not an overnight thing where you snap your fingers. So we'll see. It's all going to depend on this offseason and what the Mets' plan is. Are they going to try to compete in 2024? I mean, the Mets could sneak into the playoffs and get swept like the Marlins were, because that's the way this format is. So I think they're not that far off from being in the playoffs with if they sign certain guys. But it comes down to the rotation. It comes down to the bullpen, and they need to get another bat in there somewhere. They need to help out Pete Alonso in the lineup. And I think from that point,
you mentioned him earlier, Ohtani.
If anybody asks, I mean, you've been asked on television, who should the Mets have DH next year? I don't see why the answer isn't Ohtani.
Yeah, that's who. There's no excuse. There's no excuse not to. Look, you can't force him to sign with the Mets, but there's no excuse to not be the high bidder at this point, because that's where Steve Cohen should be flexing his financial muscle.
Can't be outbid on Ohtani. Can't be outbid on Yamamoto.
Exactly.
Those are the two guys.
Exactly. And I mean, if you sign those two guys, and I'm not saying that that's going to happen or predicting that's going to happen, but if you do that, that is one whale of an offseason. I mean, you have had, and you have improved this team greatly. The problem is that Yamamoto, he's so young, he's so unique in the fact that he'd be coming to the majors at such a young age, when you don't really get free agent pitchers to do that. He's going to get a nice deal, a really, really nice deal. So
do you think it helps at all, the success Senga had last season in going for Yamamoto? If, like, let's say the Giants and Mets offer the same money, does it help to have Senga?
I would think so. But it also, Senga has made it clear, I think, in some of the reports that have been out there, that he would welcome this guy to the team. In Japanese culture, and I don't want to overstate any of my knowledge of it, but my impression is that somewhat, seniority and someone being your elder is a very significant thing. And if Yamamoto feels that he's stealing Senga's thunder, because his contract is going to destroy Senga's contract,
right?
Destroy, annihilate, obliterate practically. Then I don't know if that will play. Maybe what Senga has reportedly said about being, wanting him on the team would wash that away. But yeah, I think that the fact that Senga thrived, and there were questions about Senga that I don't think there are about in the same way about Yamamoto, in terms of, because you remember when he was going through free agency last year, teams were pursuing him. Some teams thought he was going to be a reliever.
Right.
Senga's clearly not a reliever. He is a dynamite starter,
Ace.
Super talented. And yes, ace level starter. So I think the fact that he had a smooth transition with the Mets would probably make Yamamoto think a little bit about, like, oh, that's a place I can go, and they know how to do it. And that's going to be a plus.
And then, he'll come over if they get him, and they'll have to do what they did with Senga last year and skip starts. But I guess at that point, you can go with the 6-man rotation. You have 2 guys from Japan in the rotation, and you can get through for a little bit. And ultimately, you saw Senga; he was fine after 2 months when they took the handcuffs off, and he dominated. One of the top ERAs in the league. Probably going to get some Cy Young votes as far as 1,
Certainly.
2, 3. He'll be in the top 5. Runner up for the Rookie of the Year, I think, is probably a strong lock behind Corbin Carroll.
Right.
And that's going to be a contract that is going to go down as a major bargain.
Yes.
And it worked out.
Yes, absolutely. That was a great move by Billy Epler, a great move by Steve Cohen to get that guy here. And they at least in his first year, they pegged him right as a starter and a super contributor. And it's been beautiful so far. It's really worked out great.
Absolutely. And having you on has been beautiful. It's worked out great. And we appreciate your time, Anthony. Let our audience know where they could find you, where they could see you, where they could read your work, and we'll send it on out of here.
Okay. Well, I appear regularly on SNY, on Baseball Night in New York, and on Honda Sports Night. So please check it out. Talking about baseball, and on the late night show, a little bit of other sports as well. You can find me on Twitter at Anthony McCarron. I write a lot of stuff for the SNY website. I was a longtime daily news reporter. I still write for them occasionally as well. And I'm a regular contributor to Baseball Digest. So get a subscription.
There you go. And you might see Anthony at Madison Square Garden if you are attending New York Ranger games. So say
exactly.
Hello.
Yes. Yeah, I do dabble. They call me Tony Pucks in the office, which I get a kick out of. Yeah.
All right. That's going to do it here for this episode of Bleav in the Mets. Make sure you're following us on social media and subscribing on YouTube so you never miss an episode at BLEAVINTHEMETS, Bleav in the Mets. And if you're listening to this, you can watch us. If you're watching us, you can listen on all podcast platforms. I'm on Twitter at Nick_Durst, on Instagram at Nick's Food and Stuff. And until next time, everybody, let's go Mets.